I got a call to remove a colony of bees from this tree at superstar Jason Derulo's house, and here's how it went.
Let's say the bees.
We started to remove bees and comb from the tree. The bees were very gentle and were not trying to sting
She's not gonna
us.
sting me? Oh,
She's not gonna sting you.
Oh,
You're okay.
she's
You're
coming.
okay.
The bees had a ton of extra honey, so everyone ate some fresh honey straight from the hive.
is it on my face? Yeah. That is good, nice and warm. It is pretty crazy. It's a lot different than the honey we get in the jars.
Tasty.
Man, so good. I need a bagel.
Jason even took off his veil and ate some honeycomb.
This is insane.
After we removed as much comb as we could, we waited for the bees to get into their new hive so they could be relocated to the Bee Leaf USA Bee Sanctuary, and it was another great day of saving the bees. This bee was outside the hive on a cold winter day. She wasn't moving, so I picked her up and I put her in my hands. I gave her a few breaths of warm air, and I waited as the heat from my breath and from my hands warmed her body. Honeybees survive the winter by clustering together inside the hive to keep themselves and their queen warm. But when a bee gets too cold like this one did, they become paralyzed and they enter a sort of chill coma. During this state, they lower their body temperature and metabolic rate to survive the cold without food. If a bee stays too cold or in this state of paralysis for too long, it can die. But if the bee is able to warm up like this one did, movement will slowly start to return to its body and it can survive. Once this bee was able to walk, I put her back where I found her and she returned to the warmth and safety of her colony. Bees had been living in this washing machine and I was called to remove them. So I carefully lifted the lid and I found a beautiful hive full of honey and very gentle bees. When I looked inside, I saw layer after layer of fresh honeycomb. The bees had worked so hard to build this hive, and I wanted to do everything I could to preserve it for them. So I started to remove the outermost parts of the hive with nectar and honey. Then I reached the heart of the hive, the brood nest. This is where the queen lays eggs and where the baby bees are born. Everything that I removed from the washing machine would be given right back to the bees in their new hive. But these pieces of comb were pretty big, so I had to cut them in half to fit into the wooden frames of the new hive. I secured each piece of comb to a frame using rubber bands, then I put the comb into the new hive. Next, I started scooping bees out of the washing machine and putting them into the new hive. As a professional beekeeper, the most important part of my job is being able to understand bee behavior, and I could tell that these bees felt comfortable with me as we worked together. After most of the comb had been removed from the washing machine, I looked around and suddenly I saw the queen at the back of the washing machine. She was a strong and beautiful queen, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe and I put her in the new hive. It looked like most of the colony had moved to the outside of the washing machine, so I used my smoker to herd them into the new hive using a little bee bridge I made for them. I scooped a few more handfuls of straggler bees into the new hive. Then I left the new hive there all afternoon. When I returned just before sunset, most of the bees had moved into the new hive, so I loaded the bees into my truck and we drove home. I had just enough daylight left, but I was able to get them settled into their new home in my apiary, and it was another great day of saving the bees. A swarm of bees settled under this umbrella and I was called to remove them, so I started scooping bees off the umbrella and putting them into a hive. When bees are in swarms like this, it means they're looking for a new place to live. They tend to be very docile since they don't have any resources to defend. They don't have a hive, food, or baby bees to protect, but they should have a queen. So with every handful of bees I scooped, I spent time searching for the queen. I repeated this process over and over again. By the time I removed most of the bees, I still had not seen the queen, and I realized this was an unusual case of a queenless swarm. This colony would not survive without a queen, but luckily I had an extra one on me I could give them. As soon as I gave the queen to the colony, they rushed to meet her. If they didn't accept her, they would try to kill her. If they did accept her, they would release her from the box by chewing through the piece of candy that stops up one end. As soon as the bees in the hive met the new queen, they began sending signals to the other bees telling them to move off the umbrella and into the box. So I just waited in the swarm of bees as the colony moved into their new home. After about 15 minutes, most of the bees were with their colony, so I checked on the queen and saw that the bees were starting to accept her. I waited a while longer for the bees to get in their new hive, then I loaded them into my truck and drove home. I put the bees in my apiary so they could continue the important work they do in a place that's safer for them and for people, and it was another great day of saving the bees. There was a big beehive under the floor of this shed, but as soon as I started to remove the hive, most of the bees moved to the outside wall, so I started to scoop the bees into the new hive with my hands. As a professional beekeeper, I've learned how to read the bees' behavior, and I could tell that these bees were calm and did not want to sting me. They just wanted to get into their new hive. So I kept scooping bees off the wall while looking for the queen bee. When the bees are gentle, I prefer to wear as little protective gear as possible. The less gear I'm wearing, the more dexterity and agility I have. After scooping most of the bees off the wall, I didn't see any signs of the queen. So I went back in the shed to look for her, and there she was, surrounded by her attendant bees. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and as soon as I put the queen in the new hive, all of the other bees followed her pheromones and went into the new hive on their own. I waited for all the bees to get into their new home, then I closed up the hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees. I got a call to remove a colony of bees from the sink cabinet of this camper trailer. First, I gave the bees just a few puffs of smoke to get them to move away from the comb so that I could grab it without squashing any bees. These bees were calm and were not trying to sting me, so I reached inside the cabinet and started to remove each piece of comb while looking for the queen bee. After I removed most of the comb, I saw the queen in the corner of the cabinet surrounded by her attendants. I put the queen in a clip and I placed her in the new hive, but most of the bees were gathering around the window of the RV, so I started scooping them up with my hands. I needed to get as many bees as I could into the new hive with their queen so that the colony would recognize this as their new home. I spent a lot of time scooping bees off the window, and I waited for the bees inside the camper to get into the new hive. I thought I was done, but when I went outside, there were a lot of bees gathering on the side of the RV. So I scooped them up, I put them in their new hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees were living in this water meter, and I was called to remove them. So I lifted the cover to reveal a beautiful hive. The bees hadn't been there for very long, but they had already built a lot of comb. The comb had eggs and baby bees, which let me know that the colony had a healthy queen. There was also pollen and nectar, but there was barely any honey yet. I put the comb into frames of the new hive so the bees would have everything they need after I moved them. I always wear protective gear when I need to, but these bees were very gentle and did not sting me. After I removed all of the comb, I started scooping bees into the new hive with my hands. As I was scooping bees, I noticed that the bees were going straight into the new hive, which let me know that the queen was probably already in there, so I gave the bees some smoke to move them a little quicker. Just like you and I do, bees move away from smoke, so as I used my smoker, the bees marched out of the old hive and into the new one to follow their queen. I waited for all the bees to get into their new hive, then I closed up the hive, loaded it into my truck, and it was another great day of saving the bees. A honeybee colony is not a monarchy like many people think it is. The queen bee is actually not the leader of the hive, and she doesn't rule over all the other bees. It's the female worker bees who make the decisions for the colony, and they do so collectively as a group. The queen has one important job. She's in charge of laying all the eggs for the colony, and she is the only bee who can create more worker bees. So if the queen is doing her job well, the colony will follow her, protect her, and care for her. If the queen bee is not doing her job, or if she gets too old or dies, the female worker bees can choose to replace her and make a new queen. They can take any female worker bee egg and turn it into a queen bee by feeding it a special diet of royal jelly throughout its development. And so a hive can go on, generation after generation, with all the bees working together to do what's best for the good of the colony. This is a male bee getting kicked out of the hive by a female bee. Male honeybees are called drones, and they don't do much work around the hive. They don't collect food, they don't take care of the baby bees, they don't build the hive, and they don't defend the hive since they don't have stingers. This is why you've probably never seen a male honeybee before unless you've been near or inside of a hive. Male bees only have one job, to mate with a queen. So when mating season is over and winter is coming, the worker bees force all of the drones out of the hive. Sometimes they chase them out, sometimes they drag them out. But once they're out of the hive, the male bees will either starve or freeze to death. In fact, you can often find a pile of dead male bees on the ground around the entrance of the hive. During the winter, there aren't as many flowers in bloom and food is scarce. The drones are just more mouths to feed at a time when resources are low. Since they're no longer making significant contributions, the female bees have to get rid of the males for the survival of the colony. In honor of World Bee Day and Guerlain's $1 million commitment to bee conservation, here are a handful of my favorite facts about honeybees. Did you know that you've probably never seen a male honeybee before? That's because over 90% of a colony's population is female. Female bees are called worker bees for a reason. They do all the work for the hive. They collect food for the colony, they build the hive, they raise the baby bees, and they take care of the queen bee. The UN has designated May 20th as World Bee Day, but you can join me and companies like Guerlain who give back to bees every day. Guerlain has committed $1 million to protecting bees. They've also established a program called Women for Bees to teach 50 women from around the world how to keep bees and start their own beekeeping business like I did. When you support brands like Guerlain, you are supporting bees and beekeepers around the world. And now, more than ever, bees need our help. A small swarm of bees had gathered on this tennis court and I was called to remove them. But once I got there, I realized this colony was in more trouble than it seemed. Their queen was dead, and because the bees were so loyal to their queen, they refused to leave her behind. They were still trying to attend to her and take care of her little bee body. So I put the queen's body in the new hive. It took the bees a few minutes to realize she had moved, but once they found her, they rushed to her and started to care for her in the new hive. So I waited for all the bees to get into their new hive, but since this colony was so small already, they needed more than a new queen to survive. They needed to join a new colony. So once I got the bees home, I put them in a standard beehive box, but I couldn't just put them with another colony and a new queen right away, or that could cause confusion, chaos, and fighting among the bees. So I put a layer of newspaper between them. The newspaper would keep the colony safe and separated while the bees got used to each other's scents. So I closed up the hive. When I checked on the bees a few days later, the bees had chewed through the newspaper and the two colonies had merged together to become one, and it was another great day of saving the bees. I got a call to remove bees from one of the weirdest places ever, this toilet. The bees had been living in the tank of this toilet for years, and they filled the entire space with comb and had no room left to grow. So I got to work removing the hive. Everything I removed from the original hive was safe for the bees to have in their new home. Here's what the comb looked like. This piece had honey at the top, pollen below, and brood on the bottom. I spent a lot of time carefully removing each piece of comb. This was a happy and healthy colony of honeybees, and they were not stinging me at all. After I removed all of the comb, the toilet was still full of bees, which told me the queen was in there. Suddenly, I saw her crawling up the side of the tank. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and I placed her in the new hive. Then I made a little bee bridge that led straight to the queen so the bees could easily get to their new hive. It worked, and the bees marched right in. After the bees started to recognize the bee box as their new home, I closed up the hive, I waited for the colony to move into the box, then we drove home, and it was another great day of saving the bees. Bees had been living in this backyard shed for at least 2 years. The landlord wanted to call an exterminator, but the family who lived here wanted to save the bees, so they called me. When I lifted up the floor, I found a huge hive full of gentle bees. The hive was so big I had to remove another section of floor to access the entire thing. Then I started removing the hive. Whatever I removed from the original hive went right into the new one so the bees would have everything they need to survive. After I removed all of the comb, I started scooping bees into the new hive. As soon as I put the bees by the new hive, they marched right in. Then a stream of bees began running out from under the floor into the new hive. So I waited and watched to see if I could spot the queen bee in the crowd. After about 15 minutes, she appeared, so I put her in a clip to keep her safe. Once the queen was in the new hive, some bees began sending signals to help the other bees find their way home. I left the hive overnight, and by the next day, the entire colony was in their new home, and it was another great day of saving the bees. I woke up one morning and my truck was covered with more bees than usual, so I ran outside in my pajamas to see what was going on. A swarm of bees that I caught the night before was leaving their hive and swarming again. I tried to offer their new hive back to them, but they weren't moving in very quickly, which told me that they wanted to go somewhere else. It was a race between me and the bees. I had to find the queen before the bees found a place to fly off to. After a few minutes, I found her. I put her in a clip to keep her safe, but before I could put her in the new hive, I had bees swarming to her in my hand. As soon as I put the queen in the hive, the bees began to go right in. I still had some bees on my hand who weren't leaving because they could still smell their queen on me. So I shook them off so they could find her. Within minutes, the entire colony was rushing to get back into their new hive. You can see how fast they were moving and how the queen was covered in bees. I waited for all the bees to get into their hive, and it was another great day of saving the bees in my pajamas.